Howdy folks, Dave here at the Thunder Maker Workshop, where I'm getting ready to cut some additional parts for my current structure project with the Creality Falcon2. I'm working on a building called Etta's Place for the ON18 Bandit Canyon Railway, and I'm taking you along with me for the entire process from beginning to end. In the last installment, we got the laser all set up and showed how you could take a structure design from a rough sketch to digital files that can be cut on a machine like this using design software like Adobe Illustrator and the Lightburn laser driver. I've been assembling the laser cut parts over the last couple of days, so before we move on, let's take a look at how those went together. Since I want the building to look old and lived in, I started by distressing all of the basswood parts with a razor saw blade, and added cut lines and knot holes with a hobby knife. A few nail holes were added too. Next, I braced up the interior side of the walls with some O-scale 6x6. Then it was time to put the walls together. I glued the basswood floor down to the MDF base and then stained it with a Minwax Early American stain marker. Once the walls were assembled, I stained them a warm red-brown using my mixture of a few drops of kiwi shoe dye in a solution of 70% isopropyl alcohol. I masked off the top half of the structure with blue painter's tape, and then sprayed the scribed-in lower wainscoting with some Rust-Oleum dark brown camo. I prepped all of the door, window, and trim parts for painting, then gave most of them a spray of the dark brown camo, while the interior window frames and a few other pieces were sprayed with a flat red oxide for contrast. The laser-etched lettering on the front of the building was filled in and hand-painted with brown watercolors. All of the wainscoting and the trim pieces were dry brushed with a light gray tan, and everything was glued into place. I glazed the windows and the front door with some clear acetate using Zap canopy glue, and then installed them in the structure. Curtains were made from folded crepe paper and glued in behind the windows, and I made a knob for the front door from an Atlas track nail. Then I finished up the walls by adding some O-scale 1x2 battens for the board and batten siding, and touched up the etched lettering with a small brush. Finally, I assembled the roof trusses and the ridge beam to create a roof that would be removable in the future. Well, so far it's coming together quite nicely, with all of the parts fitting together as they should. But you should know that I did have to recut some of the parts due to a slight misalignment between the etched and cut lines. This happened when the laser cutting head came into contact with the work surface, brushing against it and actually moving it a few thousandths of an inch between the etching and the cutting phase. This can sometimes happen with diode laser machines if the height of the cutting head is not set correctly, or if the work surface is warped, so it comes up so the head will brush against it. You also need to make sure that the cutting head is on here nice and tight and doesn't have the play in it that you see here. This is where my problem came from. Once it was all tightened up with the provided tools, everything worked much better. Oftentimes at this point in a build, I'll go back to the computer and the laser to cut a few more parts to finish it off. In this case, I want to add a bump out shed to the rear of the building. I want to create a covered front porch here. And of course, I want to cut some panels and some shingles for the roof. But before we jump back into using the machine today, some real talk. My videos are generally about process, not about products. I don't do product demos per se. There are plenty of channels out there that do that, and more power to them. My only interest, my only motivation for reviewing this machine is to see if and how it can be integrated into my creative process and possibly into yours. A tool is really only useful if it makes the creative process more efficient and or more enjoyable. I am occasionally offered perks and affiliate deals from brands, and I regularly turn them down because I don't want to be beholden to anyone. I tried to make that as clear as I possibly could to the folks that wanted to send me this machine. Generally, I don't talk about a product at all unless I like it. If I don't like it, I don't talk about it unless they ask me to. And with all of that in mind, there are a few other features of this machine that you should probably know about. The first thing you should know is that the machine does not come with this cover. That's extra. And I apologize for not mentioning it in the first video, but I didn't really even know until that fact was made clear to me. Truth is, it does an okay job of expelling the smoke, but while we're on the topic, I find it rather odd that the interior is reflective. Random reflections are usually something you want to try to avoid when dealing with highly charged photons. I can only assume that perhaps it's a fire retardant coating of some kind, because this thing is made of nylon, and nylon will burn and melt if exposed to an open flame. But to be completely fair, the Creality folks make no claims that this thing is fireproof or that this clear plastic is OD rated for laser safety. What that means is please protect your eyesight with a pair of optical density safety glasses or goggles when using this or any other laser cutter. A couple other items which are not included, and again, I failed to mention this in the first video and I apologize, are the honeycomb tray and the protective metal sheet. Those are also extra. I didn't mention it because it never occurred to me that anyone would sell a machine like this without these two very basic safety necessities. What you see here is what comes in the box when you order the Creality Falcon2, except for the iMac. Also on the subject of safety, I would like to thank my friend Calvin Witt from the YouTube channel Make It With Calvin for helping me to identify a couple of other issues. First is the absence of any sort of interlocking emergency stop switch. On an enclosed laser machine, there is generally a kill switch wired directly to the enclosure door that will turn the laser off immediately if the door is opened during operation. No cover means no door. No door means no interlocking kill switch. But again, to be fair, this is generally true of any open frame style laser or CNC machine. Creality does advertise 5 safety precautions that are built into this machine. First, there's a bidirectional safety switch, which stops the machine and sounds an alarm if the laser head hits one side of the machine or the other. Handy, I suppose, if the machine is bumped. Also handy here is the active stop function, which will shut the laser down and sound an alarm if it is suddenly tilted, flipped, or dropped. And I can tell you it's never a good idea to tilt, flip, or drop any laser cutter. There's a security lock here, which I showed you last time, so you need a key to operate the machine. And there's also this emergency stop button, which I suppose is their answer to the interlock I mentioned earlier. So that'll stop the machine in its tracks if you press it down. There's a protective cover over the laser emitter also, and that does somewhat mitigate excess light escaping from the laser and potentially damaging your eyesight. They also like to point out what they call the triple monitoring system, and that's these 3 LEDs right up here. This first one tells you if the air is off or on, red for off, green for on. The middle one monitors an open flame and will flash red and sound an alarm if one is detected, and the machine will stop. And the third LED shows green if the lens is clean and ready to go, but will turn red if the lens gets dirty and needs to be cleaned. And speaking of airflow, there is the Integrated Air Assist System, a feature which Creality calls groundbreaking in their marketing materials. This air pump sends a stream of air to the laser head during operations, blowing away smoke that might obscure the beam and also small bits of debris. This has been a pretty standard feature on most CO2 lasers for quite a while, so to call it groundbreaking is a bit of a stretch. Now, you can manually adjust the airflow during operation with this little dial right here, or you can set the air to be off or on before starting in Lightburn software. What I've found is that in practice, off or on is really pretty much all you need, off for engraving and on for cutting. I have found no occasion to adjust the airflow during operation and frankly think this feature is a little gimmicky, particularly since it's nearly impossible to access the airflow dial with that cover in place. To be very clear, none of this is to say that the Creality Falcon2 is a bad or unsafe machine. It's not. In fact, it's a fine machine, and it could become a valuable tool for you with the proper upgrades and precautions. My goal here is just to make the viewer aware that the marketing hyperbole that comes with machines like this is just that. Take it all with a grain of salt. Do your research, do your due diligence before plunking down your hard-earned money and decide for yourself. Now, let's make some more laser cut parts, get back to the build. Back in Adobe Illustrator again, we can lay out a couple of roof panels. And these are going to be cut from some 1/32 of an inch thick chipboard, which is just inexpensive cardboard. We'll put some scribe lines on here on this side for shingles. Then I just need to duplicate this by copying it and pasting it. And then we've got both sides of our roof. And I'll just open this up in Lightburn, and I'm going to do something a little complicated with this chipboard roof. It's going to be a two-sided piece, so it's going to be etched on one side and etched and cut on the other side. So I'm going to have to do one side, one pass, and then flip it over. So I've got an A and a B file. This is the A file, which is just the etched line. So I'll get some boards that look like they're 6 inches apart, and then I'll flip it over and bring in the other file and cut it and etch it on that side. Of course, the complicated part, the difficult part, is making sure everything is registered and aligned as close as we can get it. Make sure the airflow is off. The speed is, I'm going to do 6,000 millimeters per minute at 30% power. All right, let's go for it. On our safety glasses, and hit start. That looks like we got a pretty good result. Now I just need to flip this over without moving anything else. Try to line it back up and as close to the same spot as it was, using the edges of this honeycomb tray as a guide. And we can load the B file and etch and cut that next. All right, let's see how those parts turned out. Looks pretty good. We've got our scribe lines on the back, on the underside, and then we have our shingle guide lines on this side. All right, now I want to cut some shingles. And fortunately, I already have a file for shingles all laid out and ready to go in O scale. We're going to cut these out of some brown craft paper. And even though this is, it's paper, it's really easy to cut, it doesn't take a lot of power, it does take a lot of time. So this is going to be a good test for the machine to see how it does on some very intricate cuts that that can take some time to do. The recommended settings here, we've got one for brown craft paper, and that's a speed of 4,000 millimeters per minute and power setting at 80%. All right, well that took about 8 minutes, which is really not bad. Right around the same as it would have taken on my, my CO2 laser. Those are totally usable. So I think I'll go ahead and cut a second sheet so I can have some extras. Now I've gone back into Illustrator one more time and designed some more 1/16 of an inch thick basswood parts. And that's for this bump out shed on the back. Now I just need to lay these out in Lightburn. Now I'll set the cut speed and power for the basswood. And I think I want that at 500 millimeters per minute and the power at 100%. And it's a really good idea to keep a notepad nearby while you're doing this. So if you find that speed and power combination that works for the materials that you use most often, make a note of it, write it down so you don't have to, reinvent the wheel every time. Once again, we make sure that the basswood is oriented the way that we want it to cut as far as the grain goes. Make sure that the laser cut head is the proper height above the work so it doesn't hit it while it's moving, because we've got some cut and etch lines here. And we'll frame it in. Make sure we're on the material. And we can go ahead and start. Okay. Let's see how these parts look. Came off clean from the sheet. That's always a good sign. Now I've got some shed and porch roof pieces to cut from some 1/16 of an inch thick MDF, and I'm going to try and use this piece of scrap. So we're going to see how good I've gotten in using the frame feature to line this up with the cutting head. I think we got it. I think we're good. Can pop these out of here without much difficulty. Yeah. All right, now I've got some window and trim parts to cut from some 25 thou laser board. Again, I've got a piece of scrap that I'm going to use. Pretty good. And the last pieces I need to cut today are some porch post details for the front porch. And I want to cut those out of some 1/8 of an inch thick or around 4 millimeter thick basswood. So once again, I'm going to have to adjust the height of the laser head. And it's got a step here for 4 to 6 millimeters. And I'm going to use their recommended power settings of 400 millimeters per minute and 100% power. Well, that worked just fine. Well, I've got all of the little parts and the shingles, things I think I'm going to need, and it's not even noon, so let's go paint and prep and put some of these together. I think the first thing I want to do is get some stain on these front porch and rear bump out shed pieces, so that'll have a chance to dry. I'm just using my usual black India ink with 70% rubbing alcohol stain. Give it kind of a weathered silvery look, so I don't want it to look like it's been painted. I want it to look like weathered, unpainted wood. And that looks pretty dark now, but that's all going to lighten up a shade while it dries. I'm also going to go ahead and stain up some 1x6 right now, which is going to be used to trim this little shack. Next, I can go ahead and assemble the windows. Those are pretty straightforward, simple. Oh, I got that just right the first time. Yeah, just make a little sill for these windows with some 2x4 glued on edge. While that stuff is drying, I can go ahead and put these roof panels on that we just cut and glue them right down to the tops of these roof trusses, these rafters. As you can see, I went back with a Minwax Early American stain marker and stained the parts of that roof panel that will show. And the stain on the front porch is dry enough now, so I can put that on. Been working on the bump out shed here, bracing up the inside of the walls with some 6x6, just like I did on the main structure. And now I'm ready to assemble these pieces together. I painted the windows a light tan so that it will look more like raw wood. I'm getting ready to glaze them. Got some clear acetate, and I'm using the old Scotch tape trick to fog the glass. A little Scotch magic tape on the back side of the glass. So now I just need to glue these in. Use a little bit of Zap Canopy glue. Yeah, I should be able to just glue these in. They should just drop right in. Yep. Now I like to go back over these. This is just some watercolors. Sort of a warm gray made from little cobalt blue and birch sienna mixed together. Does a nice job of blending it in with the wood, the stained wood. Giving it a little weathering as well. Just want a little variation on there. You don't want the color to be all uniform on something like this. You want it to be kind of mottled and varied to show the weather. And just get some glue on these edges, these tabs. And if I did everything right, this should fit right in this opening. Not too much persuasion. There we go. Now this gap right here will all make sense when it's installed over on the layout. Now I can go ahead and glue the rest of these MDF rafters in. And I just did a little staining on the ends of these just to make them kind of a weathered gray in the parts that show. And the parts that don't show, don't worry about it. And these are those pieces of 1x6 that I stained up. Putting those on here for the trim at the corners. It covers those tabs and slots nicely. I think the last thing I'm going to have time for today is a roof for this little back room. And I didn't laser cut one because it's just a rectangle. But if you remember, this is that chipboard that I etched to create these roof panels. So now I'm going to cut one out to fit on there. I need that to be, let's see, 2 5/8 by 1.5. Really wanted to have this little shed on the back for a couple of reasons. One, it adds a lot of visual interest. It just makes the building more interesting to look at. But also because in the old westerns, there's always the back room. There's always the back room where the wounded gunfighter goes to be taken care of and heal, and so he can go out and fight again and save the day. So, gotta have the back room. Well, I'm very pleased with the way that Etta's place is coming along so far. Obviously, there's still more to do, but all of that's going to have to wait until next time. And that's when we'll finish up the roof and the front porch. We'll add some LED lighting to the interior and then work the whole thing into the scene over on the ON18 Bandit Canyon Railway layout. I also want to talk more about the Creality Falcon2 and what its best uses are for the hobbyist and how it compares with other machines you might find out there on the market. But until then, I hope you'll follow Thunder Mesa on Instagram at thunder.mesa, and you can see all that's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell on this video if you'd like to see more. And if you really like what we're doing here at the channel and would like to show your support, you can always head on over to patreon.com/thundermesa like these nice folks did and show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.